One connection, and maybe this is implicit in how you answered my first theodicy question, I don't know, but one seeming connection between the problem of evil in the sense of the suffering we see and the question of eternal damnation is that one common answer to the problem of evil is to say, well, yeah, God could have made it so that everything is peaches and cream, but God wanted us to have free will. Free will means you will make mistakes. Suffering will happen. And sometimes that same answer is given to explain eternal damnation, right? It may seem unjust, but you have, or it may seem unfortunate, but you have free will and you screwed up and you have to suffer forever, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the most popular answer today. C.S. Lewis, the gates of hell are locked from the inside and all that. And to some degree, psychologically, it's true. To the degree that we all experience the hell that really exists, that we all know, it's because we choose not to love, and the love of others becomes a torment to us. But it's totally nonsensical as a justification for the idea of an eternal hell, for any number of reasons. One, it presumes a libertarian model of freedom that I think is rationally unsustainable. If you look at what it is that can actually logically be called a free act, it would have to be one that takes the form, the sort of the classical notion of the intellectualist model of liberty, which is that, first of all, to the degree that you're sane, you have to be sane to make free choices. If you see somebody who wants to run into a burning building and be consumed by the fire because he's got it into his mind that the angels are telling him to do this and that it will be a delightful thing, his choice to do that really isn't free, is it? You have to know what you're choosing, and so every time you reject what would really make you happy, what would really be the satisfaction of the deepest promptings of your nature, you do so out of, to a certain degree, a certain amount of ignorance. You've made a mistake. As you said, freedom makes it possible to make mistakes. But mistakes are themselves a kind of bondage, right? It means that your freedom was constrained by the limits of what you knew or of your rational capacity. In the classical view of freedom, you need to accept that a rational nature desires the transcendentals, let's say, the good, the true. There's an index of values that you long for. What will actually satisfy your nature? Because you have that transcendental orientation of the will and the mind towards things, like I want this because it's beautiful. That's because you have a transcendental desire for beauty first, before you can desire a finite object as beautiful. That makes you free. It gives you an index within which to make judgments. Freedom is always a rational. It just is. To the degree that it's irrational, the closer it comes to a purely spontaneous physical accident, like an embolism or an earthquake. To the degree that it's really free, if there is real freedom, it has this structure. You're making judgments in light of an index of values that exceed the boundaries of the empirical world, but that are the entire orientation of your nature. And this isn't all that abstract. Again, we can see it as a sort of example I gave you. A fool might thrust his hand into the fire, but only a lunatic will keep it there, because his nature desires pleasure rather than pain. Okay. If you really believe, as the Christians claim is the case, that God is the sole good of being, is the source and end of all things, the only thing that can truly fulfill a rational nature in its own natural end, it's longing for good, it's longing for love, it's longing for truth, beauty, then there can never really be a free rejection of God, except under to a very limited degree. To some degree, it has to do with irrationality or ignorance. And so the claim that a rational creature chooses unending torment and the thwarting of his or her nature just out of a perversity that has no rationale no rational basis, and say that that's a free decision made compos mentis that therefore justifies the teaching of eternal dereliction and misery is absurd.
So you're saying that
it's again a logically vacuous claim. The example, I'm sorry to keep talking and such, but the example I always like to give, you know Frank Stockton's story, the lady or the tiger? Well, he's not quite as famous as Dostoevsky, so you don't.
I can be excused for this one. Okay, yeah. But why don't you review it on the assumption that
it's just that the story is about it's a mythical kingdom in which there's a tyrant king who's sort of semi-civilized, who's come up with a way of punishing criminals in which they put in an arena, and there are two doors, and behind one of the doors is a famished tiger who will devour them if they open that door, and the other is a beautiful woman. It's assumed the criminals are men. This is a 19th century story. And the most beautiful available maiden in the village, and they'll immediately be married. Those are your two choices. Now, that's not always a happy thing. It could be that you're already married or that you love someone else. You have no choice. Okay. But let's put all that aside. Put away the rest of the story, too, which is actually about the princess that the courtier falls in love with. In the story, there's a courtier who's been sentenced to this because he fell in love with the king's daughter. Now, what makes him freer? Not knowing which door is which, or knowing where the tiger is and where the girl is? Well, in the latter case, he's freer to make a free decision. What are the chances that he's going to choose the door with the tiger?
Well, 50-50.
No, I would say zero if he's...
Oh, you mean if he knows? If he knows.
If he knows and he's sane.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's the point, is that it's not the choice that makes you free. It's knowing what you're choosing. But the more you know, the less there is to choose. The free will naturally, spontaneously moves towards the end that it
so are you saying
desires.
that by definition, truly sinful behavior cannot be a product of free choice?
Not fully free, not perfectly free, not free enough to justify the teaching of an eternal hell. No. Okay.
Is there also, and again, maybe relatedly, I don't know, is part of your argument kind of like, look, God set this whole thing up. How can we be, isn't God ultimately responsible for things, like the repeated commission of these things? It's like if you're the CEO, ultimately everything happens on your watch. You're the one who hired them. You're the one who trained them. It's not an exact analogy, but is there a little bit of that spirit?
To a certain extent, yeah. I mean, that's part of the argument of the first meditation in my book is on the, again, collapsing the distinction between will and permission and God. If you really think through to the end what you're saying when you make certain claims about what God would will or not will, and that's why you go, what did someone like Origen or Gregory of Nyssa think that the point of creation is? It's ultimately to call spirits out of nothingness into eternal divinizing union with God and within a frame of created nature, which is full of the glory of God and is absolute. That's it. That's the whole point. If you don't reach that end, then God's will has been thwarted. If you think that God's will is to set up this ridiculous game of chance in which you either get the golden ticket or you don't, you either get in to see Willy Wonka or you don't, and if